In the dim heart of a southern estate, a cruel master decided to hide away what he considered an imperfection from the world and locked the albino slave deep in the cellar where sunlight could never reach, and time became a silent tormentor. The boy, who had been pale and fragile to begin with, was left there for years with scraps of food and water shoved through a slit in the door, and the sound of rats scratching in the corners became his only company. The world above forgot him as seasons changed, and generations passed. Footsteps came and went. The plantation's life continued with laughter and cruelty alike, but below the floorboards something else was happening, something that defied both reason and nature. The boy began to lose his sense of self as the walls pressed closer in his mind, twisted by hunger and loneliness and the absence of human voice. He spoke to the shadows, and the shadows spoke back, whispering thoughts that were not his own, until he no longer knew if he was dreaming or awake. His skin, once pale, became ghostly white like the wax of a candle, and his eyes that once had color became pools of milk reflecting no light. The cellar was damp, filled with mold and decay, and yet within it life persisted in grotesque forms. Insects thrived, and so did the strange hunger that grew inside him. He learned to crawl rather than walk, his bones bending, his posture breaking as years passed, and his body adapted to the darkness. The noises above, the creaking of wood, the distant echoes of laughter began to sound like mockery. He hated them, but he longed for them. He remembered the voice of his mother, perhaps, though it was faint, or maybe it was the echo of a memory that belonged to someone else. Every hour stretched into eternity, and he began to forget words. He began to grunt, to hiss, to breathe like the things that shared the cellar with him. When storms came and water seeped in, he drank it muddy and cold, and thanked the unseen gods for mercy. When rats fell from the beams, he tore them apart with desperate hunger, and the act did not repulse him because there was no morality in the cellar. There was only survival. The walls dripped with condensation, and his hair grew long, matted, tangled into webs of filth, until it seemed he wore the cellar itself as a cloak. His nails became claws, and his teeth broke and regrew jagged and uneven, as if the body was reshaping itself to meet the demands of its prison. The years blended, and he began to hear voices again, not just his own but the master's voice, whispering promises, threats, commands. He spoke back, at first softly, then with rage. He cursed the man above, cursed his name again and again, until the echoes answered back and the cellar itself seemed to breathe with him. Sometimes he would press his face against the slit in the door and see only darkness beyond, but he imagined the light and what it might feel like to touch it, and the imagining hurt more than the hunger. The cellar's darkness had seeped into his veins until it was no longer a place but a part of him. His dreams became violent. He dreamed of open fields of fire, of revenge. He dreamed of tearing the door off its hinges and feeling air move over his skin again. When the 12th year came, something in him broke, or perhaps awakened. He stopped counting days, stopped fearing death, stopped recognizing himself. The master grew old above his sins, forgotten by his peers, until curiosity or guilt or madness drove him back to the door he had once locked. He opened it, expecting bones, but what waited inside was not death but transformation. The air that escaped from the cellar was thick with rot, and a sound came from below that was not quite human, a low growl that made the master's blood run cold. The creature that crawled out was thin, impossibly so, its limbs too long, its face half hidden beneath layers of filth and hair, its eyes glowing faintly like pale lanterns. It moved slowly but with purpose, and the master stumbled back, calling out for help, but the house seemed empty. The world seemed to hold its breath. The thing that had once been a boy now stood upright, trembling with the effort of movement, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was not words but something older, deeper, filled with years of silence, turned into rage. It lunged. The master screamed, and the cellar door closed again, this time not with a lock but with finality. What came out of that place was neither man nor spirit, but a reminder of what cruelty breeds disappears when it is left to fester. Unseen, the house would stand for years after that, the townsfolk whispering about the noises that came from beneath the ground and the pale figure seen walking near the edge of the woods at night. Some said it was vengeance, others said it was madness, but the truth was that it was both. It was the ghost of a boy who had been buried alive in darkness and returned as the embodiment of it. The master's cruelty had created not a monster but a mirror reflecting the evil that lay hidden within all men, and the cellar that once imprisoned flesh now became a tomb of conscience, echoing endlessly with the sound of what humanity loses when mercy is forgotten. The story begins with a plantation where silence hung heavy and cruelty was the air that filled every breath. The master was a man of power, wealth and unchecked arrogance, whose pride turned to disgust when he saw the albino child among his slaves. The boy's pale skin and ghost-like eyes offended his sense of control, and so he decided to erase the sight of him from the world by locking him away in a cellar beneath the old house. The door shut with a thud that echoed like a sentence sealing the boy's fate. 12 years passed and the world above forgot his existence while the earth below claimed him piece by piece. The cellar was not only dark, it was alive with dampness, insects and the slow crawl of rot. The boy learned to move in the blackness, his body guided by instinct rather than sight. He could feel every inch of the rough wall, every drip of water from the ceiling, every vibration when footsteps crossed the floor above. At first he cried, screamed, begged for mercy, but no answer came, only the steady rhythm of his own heart pounding like a drum in a grave. His mind began to twist as hunger replaced hope and silence replaced speech. He tried to remember his name, but it slipped away, leaving behind only the sound of breath and the pulse of fear. He talked to himself for months, then years, and finally forgot what words were. His voice became a growl and his thoughts became sensations, smells, sounds, movements. The cellar became his world and he learned its every secret. He could hear the rats nesting in the corners, the sound of roots breaking through the walls, the hum of insects breeding in decay. The darkness taught him to adapt. His eyes dulled to light and his hearing sharpened beyond measure. His body changed, his bones hardened, his limbs stretched, his skin grew thin, almost translucent, like a ghost caught between life and death. The boy was becoming something else, something born of solitude and starvation, yet sustained by a stubborn will to exist. Above him the plantation thrived. The master held parties, drank whiskey and told tales of dominance, never speaking of the secret buried beneath his feet. The irony was that his sin grew stronger with each passing year. The cellar began to emit strange noises at night, scratching thuds, whispers too human to be rats but too unnatural to be souls of the dead. Some servants claimed they saw something move near the cellar door when the moonlight hit it right, a flicker of white, a shadow breathing. They whispered that the master's sin had taken form, and he laughed, dismissing it as superstition. Yet when he walked past the cellar he could feel eyes staring from within, unseen but alive. He had nightmares of the boy, pale and trembling, crawling through the dark with teeth too sharp and fingers like blades clawing toward him. He would wake drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, but he could not bring himself to open that door. Meanwhile the creature below remembered the faint fragments of memory that had not rotted away, became fuel for something burning inside him, a hatred so deep that it replaced hunger. He began to move differently, slower, quieter. He was waiting, though he did not know for what. The years had erased his sense of time, yet instinct whispered that the moment would come when the door would open again. He practiced climbing the walls, scraping grooves into the stone. He listened to the master's footsteps, memorizing their pattern and the creak of the hinges above. When the rain came and flooded the cellar he did not fear drowning, for he was part of that darkness now. On the 12th year the master grew old and guilt began to corrode the edges of his sanity. He dreamed again of the albino boy and of voices calling from beneath the floor. One night, unable to bear the weight of silence, he took a lantern and descended into the cellar. His hand shook as he turned the key. The smell that escaped was foul enough to make him gag, and yet curiosity overpowered disgust. He lifted the lantern and saw movement at the far corner. The light flickered and revealed something. Crouched low, staring back at him with eyes that glowed like wet glass. The creature did not move at first. It studied him as if recognizing something from a forgotten past. The master took a step forward, whispering a name he barely remembered, and in that instant the creature leapt. The lantern fell and shattered. The flame burst briefly, lighting the walls, and in that flash the master saw the full horror before him: the twisted body, the jagged teeth, the face that was both human and beast. The scream that followed echoed through the empty house, and the servants who heard it fled into the night. When they returned days later, they found the cellar door open, but nothing inside except claw marks streaked across the walls and the remains of the lantern. The master was gone, no trace left except his cane broken near the threshold. Some said the creature killed him and fled, others said the cellar swallowed them both, but the truth was more sinister. The creature had become something that could no longer die, something that had been forged by cruelty and silence into a form of vengeance itself. The nearby woods began to whisper of sightings: a pale figure seen crouching near the trees at dusk, eyes gleaming faintly, and a low growl echoing through the mist. Those who wandered too close claimed to feel watched, as though the forest itself held its breath. Over time the plantation fell to ruin, the cellar collapsed and the house decayed, yet the legend remained. The locals said that what came out of that cellar was no longer human, that it was the embodiment of pain left to rot in the dark. They said it waited in the woods for the blood of those who carried the cruelty of their ancestors. A few brave souls ventured near at night and returned shaken, swearing they heard the faint sound of chains dragging beneath the soil. What had been born of imprisonment and neglect had become a symbol of every sin buried out of sight, and the truth of the story remained unspoken for generations, because deep down they knew that the creature was not a myth but a reflection of what happens when compassion dies and cruelty becomes law. The boy had entered the cellar as a slave, but what emerged was the shadow of humanity itself, stripped of all that is tender and filled with the raw, endless hunger of vengeance that no light could ever cure. The cellar stood beneath the old plantation house like a forgotten scar hidden under the skin of a dying body. It was built to store wine and secrets, but instead it became a womb of darkness where time ceased to move and mercy had no meaning. The master had locked the albino slave there for reasons that even cruelty could barely justify, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of superstition, or perhaps simply because he could. The boy was different. His white skin and pale eyes were seen as a curse, and the master feared that difference more than he feared God. So he sealed him away and turned the key, as if burying a sin that no one would ever find. The first days were filled with cries that shook the walls, but no one listened. The house above was alive with music and laughter, while below it the boy's voice cracked and faded into silence. The hunger came quickly and the darkness followed. He learned that to survive he must become part of the cellar itself. He stopped waiting for footsteps and began to listen to the breathing of the earth, the dripping of water, the crawling of insects. The dark became his only companion, and in its embrace he began to change. The transformation was not sudden, but it was absolute. The body weakened and strengthened in new unnatural ways. His skin lost warmth, becoming cold and slick like the stones that surrounded him. His nails grew long, his hair tangled into knots that caught dust and cobwebs. He stopped dreaming of the sun because he could no longer remember its touch. The boy who had once been human began to move on instinct, crouching and crawling through the pitch black like an animal searching for something that did not exist, yet within the madness there was still memory, a faint whisper of who he had been, a ghost of his own name that sometimes echoed when he pressed his forehead against the wall. He would imagine faces, voices, the soft hum of life above, and each vision would break him further until at last even the thought of other people became alien. As years passed he stopped counting them, the seasons meant nothing, and the walls that held him seemed to breathe the same stale air he exhaled. He started to hear whispers, not from above but from within. The darkness spoke to him in tones that were soft and terrible, promising power, freedom, vengeance. It told him that pain was a kind of seed that if watered with hatred could grow into something stronger than death. The boy listened because there was nothing else to do, and in listening he allowed the darkness to root inside him. His heart slowed, his hunger dulled, and he began to feel strength in the stillness. He could sense things he had never sensed before: the movement of rats, the tremor of footsteps, the faint hum of blood moving through the veins of those above. The cellar was no longer a prison, it was a cocoon. Above him the master aged, surrounded by ghosts of his own making. He heard noises at night, sometimes scratching, sometimes low murmurs that rose from the floorboards. He would wake drenched in sweat, swearing. He saw eyes in the shadows, eyes too pale, too familiar. The servants whispered of curses, they spoke of the white boy buried beneath the ground, and begged the master to leave the house, but he refused. Pride chained him as surely as the cellar walls chained the boy. The nights grew colder, the noises louder, and the air seemed to thicken with a presence that watched and waited. When the 12th year came, the master finally broke. He could no longer bear the weight of silence, so he descended the stairs with a lantern trembling in his hand. The door creaked open for the first time in more than a decade, and the air that rushed out was thick with decay and something older than rot. The master lifted the light and saw movement, a shape shifting in the darkness, crouched low, its skin white as bone, its eyes reflecting the flame like mirrors of milk. He whispered a name, though he did not know why, and the thing before him tilted its head as if trying to remember what that name meant. Then it moved. The motion was too fast, too fluid for something starved for 12 years. The lantern fell shattering on the ground, and for a brief instant the flicker of fire revealed everything. The creature stood tall, its body twisted by years of confinement, its face both human and not, its teeth glinting like shards of glass. The master screamed, and the cellar swallowed the sound whole. When the servants found the house the next morning, the cellar door was open, but the master was gone. There were claw marks along the walls and streaks of blood that led upward but ended at the threshold. No body, no bones, nothing but the echo of what had happened from that day. The house stood empty, yet those who passed by claimed they could hear sounds from below, not words but breathing, the slow steady rhythm of something that had learned patience. The woods surrounding the property became a place no one entered at night. Pale shapes were said to move through the fog, and sometimes travelers spoke of a figure standing at the edge of the trees, its eyes glowing faintly before vanishing into the dark. What had come out of that cellar was no longer a man nor a ghost, but something in between, a creation of pain shaped by isolation and born again through vengeance. It carried no memory of kindness, only the deep hunger of injustice. It did not speak because words were for the living, and it was something beyond that. It existed to haunt the lineage of cruelty, to remind the world that no sin truly stays buried. The albino boy had been erased from history, but what he became could not be forgotten. The cellar had given birth to a myth that spread across generations, whispered from one trembling mouth to another. They said that on nights when the moon was hidden, the creature walked the grounds of the old plantation, dragging its shadow like a shroud, searching not for food but for redemption that would never come. In the end, the story was not about the monster in the cellar but about the man who made him. The master had sought to hide what he feared, and in doing so created a reflection of his own soul, twisted and stripped of all light. The cellar was both punishment and prophecy, a place where cruelty bred its own consequence. What came out was not human anymore because humanity had been denied to it from the beginning. It was the truth of suffering given form, the echo of every scream